Breaking tonight, still without a deal on U.S. tariffs, Mark Carney is hitting back, taking aim at some auto companies for moving jobs and production south of the border.
Donald Trump says it's down to Democrats to reopen the U.S. government as the shutdown enters its 34th day.
Water is becoming scarce. Rivers are drying up, lakes are disappearing underground, and what once seemed endless is now a matter of survival. America is experiencing the worst drought in its history. Millions of people in the Southwest, from Arizona to California, are living on the brink of water collapse. The Colorado River, which once carved out canyons, now barely reaches the ocean. Reservoirs built during the Roosevelt era are exposing their bottoms, and cities that have grown up on desert land count every liter like gold. Against the backdrop of this crisis, the voice of a man who wants to change the rules again is heard. He does not ask, he demands. He demands what lies on the other side of the border, where the ice does not melt completely even in summer, where thousands of lakes reflect the northern sky, and where a fifth of all the planet's fresh water lives. Canada, a country that suddenly found itself not just a neighbor, but the owner of the most valuable resource of the 21st century. When the one who calls water a fact of logical cooperation makes his demand, the world freezes. But the response that comes from Ottawa surprises even allies. No negotiations, no bargaining. Just one sentence. Canadian water is not a commodity, it is part of our country, and it is not for sale. These words become a turning point, the moment when the century-old friendship between the two powers begins to crack at the seams. For the first time since the War of 1812, Washington and Ottawa see each other not as partners, but as parties to a future conflict, not over oil, not over gold, but over something without which no human being on Earth can survive. While America is building desalination plants and revising water distribution laws, Canada is discussing something else. What will happen if the flow goes south? What if economic dependence turns into political dependence? After all, water is not just a liquid. It is control, power, and the ability to dictate terms. And once someone starts selling, they will not be able to stop. A former banker, accustomed to crises and negotiations, understands this better than most. He knows that as soon as water becomes an export, it will cease to belong to the country. It will be controlled by markets, corporations, and contracts, where there is no place for nature, only the price per liter. And so he closes the door firmly and forever. But in America, this decision sounds like betrayal. How can you sit on an ocean of water when your neighbors are dying of thirst? Asked TV hosts. In Washington, plans for pipelines across the continent are emerging. Politicians talk about mutual benefit. Scientists talk about technical necessity. And in the Canadian news, a word that has not been uttered for decades is being heard more and more often: sovereignty. Today, the question is simple and frightening. If you have water and your neighbor does not, what do you choose to share or to protect? What is yours? And where is the line between humanity and national security? While some see the northern lakes as salvation, others see them as a new frontier of conflict. And perhaps it is here, in the cold waters of Canada, that the story of North America's first water war begins. America is suffocating from the heat. The drought, which began as a seasonal anomaly, has turned into a disaster. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the water level in the Colorado River has fallen to a historic low, and the two largest reservoirs, Mid and Powell, have lost nearly 75% of their volume. In some counties of Nevada, water is supplied on a schedule, and Arizona farmers are leaving their fields under the scorching sun because there is nothing left to water them with. Drinking water is becoming a political issue, and cities are beginning to fight not for investment, but for sources. It is against this backdrop, as the United States faces the most serious water threat in its history, that a statement is made that changes the tone of the entire North American continent. During a campaign rally in Phoenix, the former U.S. president addresses the crowd with words that immediately become a quote: We have a neighbor who has millions of gallons of water just flowing north, and we have a desert. Is that fair? This is not diplomacy. It is a demand, and it is presented as a promise to voters. We will take what we need, legally, fairly, together, but we will take it. These words instantly spread across channels and social networks, sparking a wave of controversy and predictions. A few days later, the U.S. administration does indeed suspend negotiations on the Columbia River Treaty, a strategic agreement between the U.S. and Canada regulating the use of transboundary waters. Formally, the reason sounds neutral: review of international obligations. But in political circles, this is interpreted unequivocally. Washington has begun to rethink the very concept of water ownership. Canadian analysts, accustomed to the calm rhetoric of their ally, hear a note of pressure in the words of American officials for the first time in decades. In Canada, the news causes an explosion. At an emergency briefing in Ottawa, the Prime Minister declares that water is part of our national identity and cannot be bought or sold. No figures, no conditions, no possibility of dialogue are mentioned, only a categorical no. For Washington, this sounds like a challenge, and for Canadians, like an act of defense. For the first time in a long time, the border between the two countries ceases to be a line of friendship and becomes a line of attraction and repulsion at the same time. The Canadian media calls what is happening Water 1812, a reminder of the last conflict between the two North American powers. Newspapers publish maps with blue lines marking the largest lakes and rivers, accompanied by figures. Canada accounts for almost 20% of the world's fresh water, while the U.S. share is rapidly declining. According to UN estimates, the southwestern states could face water shortages for 40 million people in just 3 years. In this context, the words of the American leader sound like more than just political rhetoric. They have become a symbol of a new type of pressure, economic and environmental. Experts call this 21st century hydropolitics. If in the 20th century superpowers fought over oil, now the stakes are higher. There is a struggle for water, a resource without which neither production, nor agriculture, nor life itself is possible. American television channels are taking up the topic. Primetime programs are being broadcast with sensational headlines. Canada sits on water gold. Why doesn't our northern neighbor want to share? We don't need oil. We need water. The hosts show footage of arid lands, dried up riverbeds, and farmers abandoning their equipment and leaving. One broadcast features a satellite image showing the border between the arid southern United States and the green territories of British Columbia. The contrast is stunning. Meanwhile, Canada is taking a different approach. The Ministry of the Environment has passed an emergency resolution declaring all freshwater reserves a strategic resource that cannot be exported without parliamentary approval. New water reserves are being created locally, areas where all commercial activity is restricted in order to preserve ecosystems. Some provinces, such as Manitoba and Ontario, are imposing a moratorium on any new water intake projects. The news reports that this move is motivated not only by politics, but also by fears of climate change. Glaciologists warn that over the past 5 years, the rate of glacier melt in the Rocky Mountains has nearly doubled, and if the trend continues, Canada could lose up to 15% of its natural resources in 30 years. But there is more to it than official statements. Analytical articles are appearing suggesting that behind the facade of diplomatic rhetoric, the first water conflict of the 21st century is unfolding, not in Africa or the Middle East, but here, between two countries that for decades have called each other inseparable allies. Leaks from American think tanks suggest that options are being considered for the construction of a continental water pipeline, a system capable of pumping millions of gallons a day from north to south. The Canadian press calls this project the new Keystone XL, only with water instead of oil. Public opinion in both countries is undergoing mirror image processes. In the U.S., more and more people perceive Ottawa's refusal as selfishness. In Canada, on the contrary, support for the protection policy is growing. Hundreds of posts and videos on the internet use the hashtag not for sale. Canadians are posting photos of their lakes with the caption, "This is not for export." In the US, slogans such as "Share the Flow" are appearing in response. Water is becoming not just a topic for negotiation, but a symbol of a new era, an era where climate, economy, and politics are intertwined in an inseparable line. When the Prime Minister repeats, Canadian water is not a commodity, he is not just talking about borders. He is talking about the fear that history, in which rich resources were turned into a tool of pressure, could repeat itself. This time, not with oil, but with the very basis of life. And while Washington is looking for ways to get water, Ottawa is doing everything it can to keep it. This is where the first chapter of a confrontation begins that may determine the future of the entire continent. After Ottawa officially refused to discuss water supplies, tensions between the two countries began to rise at an unexpected rate. In Washington, this refusal was perceived not simply as a political declaration, but as an insult. Publications began to appear in American analytical circles, claiming that Canada was abusing its geographical advantage. At congressional hearings, there is talk of the need to reconsider the principles of good neighborliness. Behind the scenes at the State Department, scenarios are being discussed, ranging from pressure through trade agreements to the use of climate initiatives as a tool of influence. Beyond the official statements, there is a growing sense of irritation. America is used to being a donor of security, not a beggar for resources. Meanwhile, Canada is developing its own strategy, not defensive, but proactive. The government has tasked experts from the Bank of Canada and the Ministries of Finance, Environment, and Energy with preparing a document codenamed the White Paper on Water. It includes economic, legal, and climate forecasts as well as scenarios of possible pressure from the US. According to a leak later published in a Canadian newspaper, one section directly warns that if Canada agrees to export water, within 5 years the country will lose control over pricing and access to its own resources. This is not speculation. Similar processes have already taken place with energy and agriculture in other countries. This document states that once water is classified as a commodity, it will automatically fall under international trade agreements, and then it will be impossible to change the decision without risking the entire economy. The American side, on the contrary, is betting on the idea of a cooperative flow, a large-scale system of waterways similar to oil pipelines, connecting the Great Lakes with the arid southern states. Internal corporate reports leaked to the press describe these plans as the project of the century. The proposal is to create a consortium of private companies that will be able to lease Canadian water under the guise of scientific and technical programs, but in fact build a supply infrastructure. And although none of the governments officially confirms the existence of negotiations, satellite images of engineering sites near the border are becoming a topic of discussion on social media. Some journalists claim that the first drilling stations testing underground flows are already operating in British Columbia, allegedly as part of a research grant. In response, Ottawa is stepping up its control. The Department of National Defense has declared northern waterways to be strategic surveillance zones, and the Department of Natural Resources has launched a new program to monitor underground sources. The phrase "protecting water means protecting the country" is increasingly heard on television. The Canadian opposition, which usually criticizes the government for being too soft, is backing its position this time. Polls show record unity. Over 80% of people think water exports should be totally banned, even if it means worse relations with the US. At the same time, there's a growing fear that the American crisis could escalate from an environmental one to a political one. Statements are appearing in Washington that water shortages pose a threat to national security. When such wording appears in documents, diplomats understand that the situation is becoming dangerous. Such expressions open the way for any measures, including coercive ones. Experts are talking about a water doctrine, analogous to the Monroe Doctrine, protecting U.S. interests by any means necessary. Against this backdrop, the Canadian leadership's position becomes more than just domestic policy. It is a demonstration of the principle that water cannot be traded. In an interview, the Prime Minister states that any country that starts selling water loses not money, but its future. This phrase is quoted around the world. It is studied in universities as an example of a political manifesto in the era of the climate crisis.